Hi, I'm RaidZero, and today we're going to be making a scanline laser in Cinema 4D and Octane using emissive textures and the dirt node. Okay, here we are in Cinema. I'm currently running R17 and Octane version 3.7 R2, which is the latest version. As you can see, we've got a really simple scene. I've just thrown a couple of lights in here and a sphere just to show you what we're going to create today. Basically, there's two ways we can do this. One of which is using a plane and an emissive texture using the dirt node, and another way we can use an actual light and a texture in the distribution to get a similar sort of effect. It's actually more realistic, probably a little bit more fiddly. If I show you on Google, this is the kind of effect that I was going for when creating these. As you can see, it's almost like a LiDAR scanner or something simpler, something scanning an object using a laser. And this is the effect we're going for. Okay, so if we jump into here, so I've got a really simple, if I turn that back on, you can see I've got a plane here that basically just runs over the object, and it's creating this line that runs through the geometry and just scans over the top of it, like so. It's quite simple to set up, so I'm going to show you how to do that from scratch. So as you can see, I've just got a really simple plane that I've set up. If we make a diffuse material, because currently in Octane that's the only material that we can make an emissive texture from, and I'm going to jump straight into the node editor. I know some of you like to still use the kind of Cinema 4D setup where you can go through and just click on each one of these things, but I think it's really good that people learn how to use the nodes, because it's a very visual way to show you what's being piped into what's going on, what textures you're using, etc, etc. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab a dirt node, just click and drag from the side menu, and we're also going to need a gradient node as well. So what we're going to do there is now pipe this dirt node into the input of the gradient node, and then from the gradient node we're going to go into our opacity, because what essentially what we want to do is the dirt node acts as a ambient occlusion, so we're going to try and create almost like a mask for this emissive texture to run over our object. So one of the first things we've got to do is reverse our gradient, so the black goes where the white was and the white goes, and you can see almost immediately there, if I chuck my material on my plane, you can see it's disappeared now, because essentially I've made the whole plane black, and I want the dirt node to be white. Okay, so if I go into the dirt node now and I start messing with a couple of these parameters, so if I change the strength to 10, you can see just a little inkling of what's going on here. So if I then basically the details is all to do with scale and how detailed your geometry is. So I'm just going to put it at 50 because I found that was a good one for kind of one size fits all. And on the radius, I really want it small, so I'm going to go for, let's say, 0.5 of a centimeter. Okay. So what we want to do now is create our emissive texture. So I need to grab a black body emission, which is one of the emission nodes, and I need to connect that to my emission. And not really much happens at the moment, but what we can do is start messing with some of these parameters as well. So I want to turn on surface brightness, and you can see now we're going to start seeing our our plane and how it's affecting our geometry in our scene. And at the moment, that's not really working for us. So another thing we need to check on is double-sided, which is a new feature. And again, it's blown out and it's now emitting light from either side of the plane. But what we can do is these are new features that we've got visible on diffuse and visible on specular. Now, if we turn these off, this is where you'll start seeing the actual line. And if we start moving that line, you can see wherever the plane is intersecting with our geometry, that's where we'll get our scan line. And something we can do, because lasers tend not to be white, they're usually a color like green or red or something like that. So what we need is a RGB spectrum. So this is where we can plug it into our distribution, and we can change the color to something a bit more laser-like. So let's go for a green. And as you can see, we can change the color to anything we want. So green, or we could have orange or red. Basically, it's really flexible. We can also up the power of this. So if we just go from 100 to say something like 2000, we're getting a bit more of a hot line. And let's increase the samples on this as well. So let's go for 1,000 samples on that as well. Okay, that's like one of the simplest ways I could think of to make that sort of effect, where you're getting the line crossing over geometry, and wherever it intersects, you're getting that line just following the topology. Another way we can create one of these scanline lasers is to use an area light with a texture. This is probably a bit more accurate on the way it works, where you see this red line where the projection is coming down from above and it's intersecting with the geometry, but as you can see, you get like a fall off as the line comes to a vertical plane, and then we rejoin again when it comes back to horizontal. This is probably a bit more fiddly, but I would say it's way more accurate to how an actual laser would work. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump over to Photoshop first, because we need to create almost like a gradient texture, so we can work with it inside the area light. So if we go to File, New, and then create a document that's 1024 pixels square. And I like to create things that I'm going to use with lights at a bit depth of 32 bit. It's just out of habit. I'm sure it would work at say 16 bit, but you'd have to test that yourself. But I generally, anything that's going to be used as a light source, 32 bit. That's kind of the rule I've set myself. Okay, so if we hit OK, we get a white document, and what we need to do is create a solid black background, and then if we create a new solid and make that white, and what we want to do is invert the mask, and what I want to do is find the center of my document. So usually what I do is I turn on snapping, and then I drag a guide, and as we get to the 512 mark, it snaps there. So if we do that both on the horizontal and vertical, so we got a center point now. So what we want to do is grab our gradient, and we want to set it to either one of these two. So I've just got the solid to transparent. So I'm going to be drawing on my mask with white. If I find my center point, and then I hold shift, and I drag just before I get to the end, and then we've got a circular grad that's in 32 bit, so you know that gradient is going to be pretty band free. Okay, so if we save this now, so we flatten our image, and we save it into our document. So if we go to desktop, and see, I've already got one here saved, but I'll just save another one just so we can see. So I'll save it as that, and I'm saving it as an open EXR. We save that, and I chose the compressions lib. Save that. Now if we jump back into Cinema now we've got that saved, we create, so I'll just turn these off. So we've got a clean scene. I create a Octane area light, and what we want to do is just move it up and rotate it down so that the light is pointing down over our sphere. There we go. So at the moment it's not really doing much in the way of creating a scan line. But what we can do is jump into our Octane light tag. And what we need to do is go into our distribution. If we click on this little drop down here, we need to go into the Octane menu, create an image texture. And by default, mine throws in a HDR from Grayscale Gorilla. Not sure why. But what if we go to our texture we just saved, so, and open this up, you can see we got a gradient in there. And this is quite important that we do this. This border mode, we need to change it to black color. Because later on that was a huge thing that I had to go through trying to figure out why it wasn't working. But that is really important that is set to black color. The next thing we need to do is we need to transform that texture so that it's almost like a really thin line with a little bit of fall off. So now by standard, lock aspect ratio is always checked from 3.7 onwards. So we need to uncheck this because we need to scale it on different axes. So in the x-axis we need to hit -1, and in the y we need, this is where we can make it really, really thin. So we need to go to 0.001. Okay. So then in projection, this is another important step. Mesh UV is pretty much the only one, Mesh UV and triplanar, I think that this doesn't really work. I found that spherical, after trying them all, seemed to be the best one basically. So as you can see here, we're starting to get that line looking across, but it's projecting really, really widely. So what we need to do is actually scale our light down. So I'm just going to scale our light all the way down, and you can see just a little bit, you can see it just getting tinier and tinier and tinier until it almost disappears. So what we need to do is go back into our light tag and we turn surface brightness off, and you can see all these little sparklies, all these little hot pixels are starting to work. So what all these hot pixels actually start saying to me is that we haven't got enough samples in our scene. So what we can do is just turn up this sample rate here. So I'm going to turn it up to 10,000. So it's essentially just telling Octane that I think this light is really important, so I want to be sending more samples to this light, and you can see how much that's cleaned that up, and it's really, really sharp now. And like as I move it over the object, you can see how nice that light's looking now. In the same way that we did with the plane scan line with the dirt node, we can also change the color of this one. So if we go down to the bottom of our Octane light tag, we can go to this use light color, and then we can go back into our Cinema 4D light and just change the color here. So we can just go for a green, or an orange, blue, anything you like. Basically, just you can change it to any color, and we've got this great effect, which I think this one is actually more accurate, where we're actually getting a projection down onto our geometry rather than intersecting with it, which we get with the dirt node. They're both pretty similar in effect, but this is probably way more physically accurate to how a laser works. Some of the more practical applications you might use for this sort of technique is something like a sneaker advert, or in this case I've got a pretty simple scene with a football boot in, a couple of lights I've thrown in, and I've got my plane with my dirt node on, and you can see how it's just running through, scanning the boot as it goes through, and it's giving it like a really cool effect. Something that you might later do in comp is maybe just exaggerate this line so you get a bit more of a glow. Maybe you can use something like Trapcode Shine or something like that, just to accentuate that line and get more of a feel for that scanning laser. I've popped in both, so I've got the plane with the dirt node on, and I've also got my laser light as well, so I can move that through my scene, and you can see the differences between these two. Whereas the laser light is falling off, like when it can't see the projection from above, whereas the plane, as it's moving through, it pretty much scans every piece of geometry that it's intersecting with. So you've got those two options there to create like a really nice laser. Hopefully you found this tutorial really helpful. If you want to get in contact with me, you can go to RaidZero.com. There you'll find all the links to my social media. I'm usually pretty responsive on those, so if you've got any feedback, I'd love to hear it.
Brograph.com, an online resource for learning Cinema 4D, After Effects, and other motion graphics tools specifically catered to help you prevail as a motion graphic designer.
What's up, bros? Welcome to another Brograph motion graphics tutorial.
With tutorials, plugins, and now a podcast with tens of thousands of listeners worldwide.
Yeah, it's a great community to be part of.
We give you professional time-saving tips, industry news, interviews, shortcuts, and lessons that help keep you current in the world of motion design.
Throw in a HDR studio, take the render settings, pick the HDR, put in a reflection, and gorgeous.
I love projects that scare me. When our art director comes to us and asks for something that I had never done before, man, it gets me pumped.
Our weekly long-form podcast will give you the latest news, help you in your file management, hardware configuration, and client relations. Learn about the latest render engines, modeling techniques, and workflow integration while staying entertained.
Real nice banana.
Ah, that's so funny. All right. I'm going to live forever.
Our Brograph Talks are a chance to see the way industry leaders from around the globe are changing the face of motion design.
Sometimes you got to make stuff that you're not going to put on your reel, and I'm not here to judge.
The podcasts and talks include people like Beeple, Barton Damer, Nick Campbell, Andrew Kramer, David Ariev, Chad Ashley, Paul Babb, EJ Hassenfrost, Mitch Myers, Chris Schmidt, Jules Urbach, Cornelius Dammert, David Brodeur, Andy Needham, Caitlin Kaju, Zubair Parker, Noseman, Ryan Bean, Casey Hupke, Nick Lyons, Sage, Joey Korenman, Jeremy Cox, Rick Barrett, John Dickinson, Matthias Omotola, Patrick Goski, Brandon Clements, Steve Teeple, Tom Glimpse, Patrick Longstream, Julia Simone, Devin Coe, Al Heck, and even Deadmau5.
You get that render done. Yeah, you better frame what?
Our Brograph breakdowns go behind the projects and give you an insight on what it's like to manage and maintain your own personal business or work for a large company. Join us for live sessions, check out our useful plugins, watch time-lapse projects, interact with us, and send us email questions and topic ideas. Or just hit the Rando Render button and do an imaginative daily that'll keep you on your toes.
Take all your dreams and let's do it!
Subscribe today and get automatic updates on the latest tutorials, tricks, tips, and inspiration Brought to you by industry professionals Dave Koss and Matt Milstead.
We don't care how you get here, folks. Just get here.
Subscribe now to Brograph Tutorials.
It's pretty good, I guess.